I am 82 years old, and I carry with me the phrase that destroyed my childhood. It was for your own good, my son. Sometimes, in the early hours of morning, I still wake up to the smell of stale bread, a dry, sour smell that came from the bag he carried when he came back from market. He never spoke to me. He never asked my name. He just took me by the hand, led me. But before that, my mother, she looked into my eyes. She adjusted my collar like someone preparing merchandise for, and she said, "Go with him. He will give you what I cannot." I was 7 years old. I slept, holding onto the hem of her skirt. I still thought the world was safe because she said she loved me. That morning, she made me a quick cup of weak, no sugar. She dressed me in the best clothes I had, clean, not because it was a special day, but because no one gives a dirty child. I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for her to say it was a joke, that it was all a mistake. But all she did, put a bag in my hand and tell me I had to be strong. The taste of that cold coffee still lives in my throat. The silence of that screams at me to this day. And you know, the worst pain is not being abandoned, it's being exchanged. Being sold for a plate of and still hearing that that was the best for me. Since that day, I have never belonged to anyone, not hers, not mine. I held this story for decades. I locked it away in a corner of my soul where not even time had the courage to touch it. But now, looking at this world full of voices, I found the courage to let mine out, because sometimes we only start dying when we stop telling the truth. And was in that silence that everything began to fall apart, even if no one saw it. You know, there are things that we swallow for so long that even them hurts our chest. And what I'm going to say now still keeps me awake at night. But before if this outburst is affecting you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next, no one has ever had the courage to until the end. And leave a comment saying your name and your city. Here I open my heart, tell my most painful secrets, allow me to get to know you better too. Show your support and tell me where you're from and what name is. At that time, misery was not a word, it was routine. We didn't say, "We're starving." Just asked, "Do you have any more stale bread left?" French countryside, 1953. The wind came in through the cracks in the wall, as if asking permission, steal the little heat that was left. The fire in the wood stove was just an ember when I woke up. I was always the last one to get up, and the first thing I felt was the cold cutting into bare feet on the stone floor. Then came the smell of smoke impregnated in the clothes hanging the stove. It was the smell of our lives, wet wood, dirty clothes, and fear. My mother'd be up by now. She always was. She wore a dingy brown coat that had been worn by all my older brothers. And she had that hard look in her that made you forget that she had once known how to smile. She didn't yell. She never yelled. But when she stopped, it was worse than any slap. Her silence had weight, it had an edge, it hurt. My father was just a blackened photo on the wall, taken before the war. His uniform was neat, his eyes were steady, and he had a moustache that looked it was drawn on with a ruler. He died in the Battle of Monte Cassino, or so they said. We never found his body. We received a letter. All we got was a news report read by a literate neighbor that said, "Missing in action. My mother never cried in front of us. Only went 3 days without eating and then went back to sewing in silence." There were 5 of us, 4 boys and 1 girl, all in a row. I was the youngest, the thinnest, the one who always got sick, and for some reason that time has never explained, the one who received the least of her attention. She looked at me as if I were a burden, not with anger, not with pity. It was as if I was there as if I had been born at the wrong time, in the wrong body, a miscalculation between war and famine. I saw how she arranged my sister's hair, how she firmly but affectionately hit my older brothers when they misbehaved. She didn't hit me or touch me. It was as if my body was burning. I remember one particularly cruel winter. The year had begun with frost on the windows, and the days were short as I was sick, a dry cough that seemed to be trying to come out of my ribs. I slept on a pile of straw in a corner of the I covered myself with whatever I could find. An old towel, perhaps, a discarded shirt. Once I woke up in middle of the night with my teeth chattering, and I went to her. I touched her arm and was startled when I felt how thin it was. It's so cold. She didn't turn around, she just said, "You're already 8 years old, you have to hold on." I was 7. It was at this time that longer silences began. Before, she would call me by my name, then it was just he. After that, not even that. One day I had to help her with the tank. I wanted to see if she would notice me. I went over, put my hands in the cold water and said, "I can wash them, Mom." She looked at my thin hands, blue from the cold, and said softly, "You're not cut out for." That's when I realized I wasn't just invisible, I was useless. And that's how the abandonment began, not with slammed doors, but with silence, averted glances, no touch. She started giving me less food. That it was much before, but now it was always, "You've already eaten," or "Leave it to your brother, he'll work more." I didn't work. I didn't go to the fields. I didn't go anywhere. I existed in a corner of the house, like an old shoe that no one has the courage to away. One day, I saw my brothers eating bread with fat on it. It was a luxury. I stood in the doorway, ate it quickly without looking at me. I knew I shouldn't ask, but my stomach hurt. My mother walked past me with a cloth in her hand. She looked at empty plate, then at me. She said, "You're used to doing without it, aren't you?" She didn't say it with hate. She said it with cold, like someone saying the sky is blue. That tore me apart. I remember the night a storm came, and I was left outside. Not as but, because no one noticed that I hadn't come in. I huddled under an overturned barrel, trying to find warmth in my own body. And as the rain heavily, I just thought, maybe if I disappear, no one will notice. Sometimes, to keep from crying, I would pretend I had been born else. I would invent a mother who called me my boy, who would give me hot soup and let me sleep on her lap. I would this for a few minutes. Then I would hear the sound of water dripping from the gutter, and I would come back to reality. She looked at me like was a burden. But the worst part is that I started to believe that I was. I can't say when I stopped expecting affection. Over time I learned not to expect anything. But there is one thing I have never forgotten. One day, I found a shirt button on the floor. It was blue, different from the ones we used to wear. I thought it was beautiful. I took it to her and said, "Look what I found." "Mom." She didn't even her face. She just said, "Keep it to yourself." It was the only thing she gave me. I kept the button in a pocket sewn into whenever I felt hungry, sad, or scared, I would run my finger over it. It was my only reminder that I had tried to show her something, and she had somehow responded. Years later, I still find myself reaching into even when I'm not wearing pants, as if I'm looking for a lost button, or maybe just a little comfort. I began notice that something was strange inside the house when my mother started cleaning the windows, even though she knew they only let in shadows. Never had the time or the energy to care about the glass. But she cleaned it. Every morning, she would wipe it with a cloth soaked in vinegar. Then with a dry rag, until it felt like she was polishing something important. The kitchen, which had always been the space for survival, smelled of tension than of food. The smell of soap, mixed with reheated coffee and damp firewood, invaded every corner of the house. But that week was something else. A new smell of a visitor, of unspoken novelty. That's when he appeared, a tall, very well-groomed man, with boots shone even on the dirt floor, and a dark hat that he politely took off when he entered. His horse seemed better cared for than we did. Big, with clean fur and a well-kept saddle. I remember that the first time I saw him, I looked at his hooves and thought he had never stepped in mud, and made me sick inside. Because the ground I stepped on every day was just that, mud, dust, and broken glass. The man had clean hands. He spoke, his gaze was serious, but it wasn't harsh, it was calculating. It was as if he had already decided everything before he even spoke. He came times, always in the late afternoon, when the sun shone crookedly through the cracks in the floorboards and left a golden trail on the peeling of the living room. My mother cleaned them before he arrived. She wiped the table with a cloth, lit the fire with extra care, heated water as if someone was going to take bath, which never happened, and every time he came, I was sent outside. "Go play with the chickens," she say without even looking in my direction. I obeyed. I would sit on the doorstep, listening to the clatter of the crackle of the coffee being filtered, the silences between one sentence and the next. I didn't hear the complete, but some escaped through the open window. Weak but calm, not a problem, doesn't eat much. He's small, but he learns. I understood, even without understanding everything. Children understand what adults pretend to hide. On the third day, they didn't tell to go out. My mother called me early, before the sun had even risen, and told me I needed to wash. She filled a bucket with water the well, threw it on the fire until it boiled, and brought it to the corner of the house. Right there, in a space with cloth hanging like a curtain, she told me to take off my clothes. She threw hot water over my shoulders and began to scrub my body a soda soap that burned like fire. She washed my hair so vigorously that my head, she didn't say a word, not even when she scrubbed my back until it was red. Not even when she gave me good shirt, the one she only wore at Christmas. She just dressed me, hurriedly straightened the collar, and tied the buttons a care I had never seen before. Then she handed me a cloth bag. Inside were an old pair of pants, a thin towel, and, sewn onto handle, the blue button, the same one I had shown her weeks before, when I had found it on the floor of the barnyard and taken it to the with my eyes shining. She took it from me without saying anything, and I thought had thrown it away, but there it was, sewn tightly with thick thread, as if to say, "This is yours now." It was the only keepsake me. I hadn't said anything yet. I didn't know what to say. His heart was beating fast. If he wanted to warn me what was coming, but I kept quiet. A child raised in hardship learns to swallow questions before they become punishment. When he arrived, he wore the same clothes, the same strong smell of leather and expensive tobacco. My mother opened the door, nodded, and he came in. Was carrying a brown bag in his hands. I could see it. A bag of white rice, a can of powdered milk, and a loaf of bread wrapped in a clean cloth. She upped the bag like someone picking up a treasure. She held it to her chest and took a deep breath. She didn't even look at me. She just said, "Go him. He'll give you a better life." I didn't understand what was best, but I understood that with him wasn't a choice. It was an order. The bent down picked up my bag firmly and beckoned me with a nod. I went. Without knowing why, without knowing where to, I just went. I walked to door, waiting for my mother to say something more. A take care, a write to me, a come back when you grow up. But nothing came. She adjusted the bag of rice on her arm and turned around. She went back into the house. The door slammed, and with it, a part of me stayed inside. The cold was already taking over the late afternoon. The man mounted the horse, pulled me by the waist, and placed me in the saddle. The animal was muscular and seemed not to care about my small body shivering up there. We walked for a long time. The sound of the hooves was, the packed earth made a rhythmic noise, almost like a mourning drum. Halfway there, he said, "Your mother did the right, you'll understand that one day." And he remained silent until the end. But to this day, at 82 years old, I still don't. The house was big, much bigger than mine. The walls were thick, made of grey stone, covered in ivy, that climbed like old hands trying to the ground. The windows had glass, something I had only seen in the village church. But even with much space, the air inside was suffocating. There was no laughter, no smell of good food. It was like living inside a stone box where echoed footsteps, coughs, silence. The man took me straight to the back. He didn't show me around. Didn't anything. He just pointed to a narrow wooden staircase that led down to the basement. It was dark, damp, and smelled of mold and old potatoes. The corner was a thin, torn mattress and a blanket that looked more like a rag. He said, "This is your corner. Go to bed early. Wake up before and he went upstairs. That first night I lay huddled, shivering, listening to the sound of footsteps upstairs. Every now and then a would slam, a cabinet would creak, and the sound of a distant radio seemed to mock my loneliness. I didn't know where I was. I know the man's name. I didn't know if he was my boss, my owner, or my jailer. All I knew was that my mother thought this was a better life. I heard a good morning in that house, not that week, not the following year. What I was, wash this, clean this. Come on, boy. They were orders, rigid, cold, short as meals. I did everything they asked. I swept the shed. The utensils, I mopped the floor. I took care of the chickens. I collected firewood. I fed the pigs, always silent. Because the first time I got a slap in the mouth that made me bleed inside my cheek. After that, I never spoke again without being told to. Fear part of my body. I woke up with it and went to sleep with it. The sound of the key turning in the upstairs door, the creaking of the stairs, of the belt being pulled from my pants. All of this was engraved on my body like a tattoo. I knew that if I made a mistake, I would get a beating. It wasn't like a child being scolded. It was punishment. It was anger. It was punishment. For example, once I dropped a plate out of nervousness. Mine were wet and it slipped. The plate broke. I tried to pick up the pieces before anyone saw, but he saw. And he made me kneel in the corn until my bled, then locked me in the basement with no food. For 2 days, only water. He didn't even speak to me. He just opened the door, pointed upstairs, and returned to his orders the next day. I was the servant. I was not treated a child, nor like a person. I was part of the furniture. The difference was that I breathed and trembled. Inside, I learned to live little. I slept little. I ate even less. I spoke almost nothing. But what hurt the most was not my body. It was the silence. Oh, that seemed to scream at the walls, as if the whole house was constantly saying, "You don't matter." For months, the cold of the basement was my blanket. The walls dripped water. The floor smelled of rotting earth. Rats scurried around at night. But I wasn't of them. I was afraid of whoever lived upstairs. That taught me one thing. The greatest danger never comes from the one crawling around, from the one with the key in his hand. One time, I found a sock under the mattress. It belonged to a child. It was blue, small, and had a hole in the toe. I stared at it for a long time. I wondered had slept there before me, who had been forgotten in that very corner. I took the sock and put it in my pocket, along with the blue button. It was all I had. And every time I heard footsteps approaching the stairs, my heart would race. I never knew what was coming. A new order. A plate of or pain. It's hard to explain how time passes when you live like this. The days have no names. The nights have no end. The cold settles your bones, and fear becomes a habit. And when you try to remember who you were before, you can't anymore. Because the boy who there, with a bag on his back, no longer existed. He had become just an obedient body, without a voice, without a name, and yet it was there in that basement among the mold and the rats that for the first time I began to keep everything, every detail, injustice, every swallowed sentence, because even without understanding it at the time, something inside me knew. One day I would tell everything. That wasn't the worst of it. The basement was dark even during the day. The only light came through a tiny crack at the top of the wall, where wind blew past as if mocking me. Time stood still in there. It flowed slowly, like a trickle of dirty water that never stops dripping. The from upstairs were my only reference that the world still existed. Footsteps, creaking doors, the boss's thick cough, and silence. So much the kind of silence that isn't peace, it's threat. After weeks of living in that silent rhythm, I tried to escape. Not because I thought but because my body could no longer bear to breathe inside a house where I didn't exist. I planned everything in silence. For dawn. I waited for the deep sleep after the wine. I waited for the wind to stop knocking on the window. I waited. Like someone waiting for I climbed the stairs slowly, avoiding the creaking wood. The door was locked, of course. But the window to the storage room door was not. I crept in, opened it slowly, and felt the cold night air hit my face like a slap. The sky was dark. The stars seemed to be looking at me. I jumped. I hurt my knee, but I ran. Barefoot, scared, hopeful. I ran across an open field, trying to remember way back, even though I didn't know where. I didn't go far. His voice cut me in the dark like a knife. "Did you think you could run, kid?" After that, all I remember is the sound of his footsteps, the hard ground my face, and the words he shouted. He called me ungrateful, trash, dead weight. He hit me with a leather strap on my back, on my hands. I screamed at first, then I stopped, not because the pain went away, but because I realized that screaming only made it worse. I myself back to the basement, literally, and there I stayed, 3 days without leaving, no food, only water. When the door finally opened, he threw a piece of bread on the floor and said, "Next time you don't come back." At 8 years old, I learned that men cry in silence. I cried in every night, lying on that stinking mattress, my body aching and my soul cracked. I swallowed my tears like someone swallowing shards of, and instead of asking God for help, I started talking to the wall. I asked the darkness why me and my mother didn't. I asked the cold why it was more constant than any hug. I never saw my mother again. After that, I understood that she wouldn't come, that there was no letter, no visit, no longing. I understood that for her, I no longer existed. Or I never existed, and that hurt more than the whipping, because the pain of the body passes, but the pain of not being remembered. That I imagined her in our old house, making bread, laughing with my brothers, saying that it was for his own good, maybe believing that, maybe to believe it. And there I was, in the dark, creating an imaginary mother to hug me instead of the real one, who gave me up for a bag of rice. Was then that silence became my only defense. I stopped talking, smiling, waiting. I understood that, in order to survive, it was better to be not to draw attention, not to make mistakes, not to truly exist, just to complete tasks, to be quick, to be useful, to be nothing. Late in the afternoon, I would lie down with my head turned toward that crack of light and try to remember her voice. I couldn't. I remembered the of her clothes, the sound of her footsteps, but not her voice. And that scared me more than anything, forgetting. Because being by the one who brought you into this world is worse than dying. At 20 years old, I was no longer the same boy who had arrived at house carrying a bag and a blue button. I no longer had a weak voice, nor frightened eyes, nor a frail that could barely stand, but inside I was still small, small in soul, small in hope, small in memory. Because when you grow up silence, you become an adult without knowing how to live. When I finally left that house, it wasn't out of courage. It was of exhaustion. The old man died. A stroke, they said. I didn't cry. I didn't stay. I grabbed the clothes on my back, some change I found in a can, and left without looking back. The city was different. The world was different. But I was still made of the same broken as before. I lived as I could. I slept in train stations, ate leftovers, sold my strength in exchange for I never asked for anything. I never told my story, because I didn't know how to tell it myself. I just said that my had died. It was easier that way, and maybe in a way it was true, because those who abandon also die, at least for those who left behind. One day, at a train station in Dijon, everything changed. I was waiting for a train that I didn't even know if it arrived, sitting on a wooden bench with my suitcase on the floor and a tired heart. It was late and the sky was gray, the kind that seems to portend something bad or important. That's when I heard my name, my real name. Not the they gave me, not the hey you I've heard my whole life, but my full name, said in a voice that made me think I'd never say it again. I around slowly, not knowing if it was real. And there he was, my maternal uncle, my mother's brother, a man with more wrinkles than I remembered. White hair, but the same look. We looked at each other for a time that I can't count, and then he said, "My God, you're alive!" I didn't understand. He me tightly. I didn't hug him back. My body froze, as if I was still under invisible orders. And he repeated, "You're alive, you're here." She said, "Died." That paralyzed me. "She who?" was all I could say. "Your mother," he replied, confused, eyes already filling with tears. "She told everyone that you died from illness. She said it was quick, that you didn't suffer. You cried for months." Believed her, all of us. I remained silent, not for lack of words, but because my chest felt like it was full of stones. My heart was beating so hard, thought it was going to break my ribs. And in that moment, everything inside me made sense. The absence, the forgetting, never having come back. She had buried my existence with a lie. She killed me alive. I thought about asking why, about knowing what she gained from, but the answer was already there. It was easier to kill me with words than to carry the guilt of abandonment. It's simpler to invent mourning than to explain the sale. She erased me. She erased my name, my story, my face. She told the family that I was dead. And deep down, that was how she convinced herself that she had done the right thing. My uncle told me that for years she would light candles for me, would tell me that I had been a good boy, that God took me early because I was special. She would tell made-up stories about my childhood. She would on the anniversaries of my death, and the family believed her. Meanwhile, I grew up alone in a basement, cleaning pig feces and listening orders that made me forget that I was once someone's son. I didn't cry in front of my uncle. I just looked at him, someone looking at an old photo and asking themselves, was this real? After a while, he asked me if I wanted to see her. I said not that day, not that year. Because how do you look into the eyes of someone who decided it was easier to tell the world you died than to that they traded you for a bag of rice? Years. That's how long it took me to come back. Not because I needed all that, but because even the desire to come back requires courage. And I spent entire life collecting silences instead of courage. For 4 decades, my mother existed as a shadow in the corners of my mind. Sometimes anger, sometimes as pity, but almost always as a knot that not even time could untie. I found out where she was by chance. A letter never expected to receive, sent by a distant cousin, with a short note. "She's alive, she's old, and she's asking for you." It took me a month to decide, another month to catch the train, and 3 more days walking around the village until my feet were really carrying me there. The house was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it just me who had grown too big inside. The windows were covered with thin curtains. The gate was rusty. And the garden. The garden was like everything else there, including her. She opened the door without surprise, as if she knew I was coming. She looked me up and her eyes dull, her skin as thin as old paper. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just said, "So you came." I went inside. There was still a part of me that wanted to understand. We sat in silence for minutes that felt like hours. The house smelled the same as before. Soap and too much stuff. Only now time lived there too. Every wall seemed loaded with decades of unsaid things. Offered me tea. I declined. I looked into her eyes, searching for something. A remorse, a request, a gesture, nothing. So I asked, "Why?" She lowered eyes, adjusted her shawl on her shoulders, and replied with a coldness that cut me more than any beating I didn't do that. We would all die. She said there were too many mouths too, that I was the weakest, that no one would have the courage to do what she did. That she did out of love, out of desperation, out of a mother's obligation, that I should understand. But no, I didn't understand. Because no in the world can give a child back their childhood. No explanation can make up for the nights of fear, the basement, the silences, the pain not existing. She was alive. But I died when I was 8. At that moment, I looked at her and saw not the woman who raised me, but the who abandoned me, and worse, who never thought it was wrong. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't call me son. She didn't get, she just explained, as if she were talking about a fair exchange, a bag of rice for a child. I stood up. I thanked her for opening she said, "I thought you would never come" answer. Me too. I left there with my heart the same size as when I entered. Tight, old, worn out. But now, full of certainty. The certainty that not every reunion heals. Some only confirm that the wound never healed. And the thing that remained was her voice, repeating, everyone would die, but no one asked what happened to the boy who was left alive on the "I never hated my mother." It may seem strange to that after everything, but the truth is that hate requires energy, it requires presence, and she was always absent. What felt for her was not hate. It was something colder, more silent. It was a hole. I just never managed to love anyone again. It's as if the thread connects one human being's heart to another had been cut in that house that night when she betrayed me behind my back. Many times I tried to put down roots in new places. I tried to get close to good people. I tried to smile honestly. But what came back always incomplete, because there was a part of me that didn't trust, not others, not myself. It's hard to love when you've grown up that you can be left at any moment. I have had relationships with hot women, yes. Women who offered me warmth, looked at me with hope. But whenever the touch became longer, when the gaze became more intimate, something inside me would freeze. It was as if a hand was pulling me back into the basement of that house, as if my body was saying, "Don't give in." It could be more of an I would back away. I would make excuses. I would disappear. I would distance myself like someone protecting themselves from that has already burned too deep once. I had friends, few, good ones. But I never my whole story. I always said that my parents had died early, that I was raised by my uncles, that life was hard, and I left it at that. Unsuspected, because I smiled when I needed to and I cried only inside. Most people thought I was just a reserved man, and in a way, I really was. The truth is that I was a man afraid to feel. The trauma remained in my eyes. I know that. I've seen it in the reflection of mirrors, in the curious of others. There are things that the body cannot hide, no matter how much the mouth denies it. An old sadness, a tiredness that is not a type of absence that even presence cannot fill. But I built my life, my way, in silence. I worked with my hands, a lot. Hands don't ask for explanations. They don't demand trust. They just do it. Carpenter, construction worker, doorman, land caretaker. I did whatever my way. I was never ashamed. I wasn't proud either. But I worked. I survived. I kept going. And that, for me, was already a victory. I never stolen. I have never lied to deceive. I have never hurt anyone who had not hurt me first. And even those I have forgiven, because over time, I've come to understand that holding a grudge is like living in the same basement for the rest of your life. I carry the trauma with me. It walks by my side. It sits with me when I'm alone. It visits me at night when everything is quieter, but I stopped fighting it. I made it silent companion, like an old friend who, despite the pain, never abandoned me. Was I happy? I don't know. I had moments of peace. I had laughs, even if brief. I had good days. I had a dog that waited for me at home, and that licked my hands as if to say, "You exist." And that was enough for me. I never saw my brothers again, or my sister, not because I didn't want to, but because there was never any search from anyone. It's if, by selling me, she had erased my name from the family register, as if I were a stain that everyone preferred to forget. Today, when I look, I see that I survived something that no one should have to experience. And yet, here I am, with my old body, with my tired voice, with my still beating, even if in pieces, because sometimes the greatest strength a man can have is to keep walking, even after he's been forgotten. Sold is more than losing your childhood. It's losing the right to trust people. It's having your trust ripped from your chest before you even what the word betrayal means. It's not just the body that changes, it's the soul that turns to stone. And once it turns to stone, it never becomes whole again. For a long time, I thought my life was just recycled pain. I thought I'd been put on this earth just to endure, swallow, and keep quiet. Because that's what I learned from an early age, that a man has to endure. A man doesn't cry, that a man doesn't ask questions, that a man doesn't feel. But I felt it, inside all the time. And what hurt the most was this: too much in a world where no one wants to know what you carry inside. Today, at 82 years old, sitting here, with my weak and my memory still raw like an open wound, I finally understood something that took me a lifetime to see. I survived. And whoever becomes history, my story is made of silences, yes, of fear, yes, of abandonment, yes, but also of resistance. Of a strength that I didn't know I had, of a boy who lost everything, even his name, but didn't lose the ability to keep walking. I don't know if anyone will fully understand what it was like to live through all of this. Maybe no one will, but now, at least someone has. And sometimes being listened to is almost like being hugged. So if you've listened this far, thank you for letting me again, even if it's just for a few minutes, for giving me back a voice that I've kept in the back of my throat for decades. Because being sold out didn't break me. It hurt me, it broke me, it killed me inside. But it also reminded me that even when broken, you can tell a story that touches someone. I know this story touched you. Because anyone who has ever the taste of abandonment immediately recognizes the silence of someone who has been forgotten. You listened to me until end, and that strengthens me more than any words of comfort. Today, my voice found a place, and perhaps inside you, has also moved. Leave a resignation in the comments, not just for me, but for those who haven't had the courage to tell their own story yet. Like video and subscribe to the channel. Every gesture of yours here reminds me that it's worth continuing to talk. Because the next story that's on screen, this one, my son, this one has a twist that to this day I don't know how I managed to survive. It's more painful and even more real. It will be a story that will make you